She's just some pathetic maid who talks with her hands. That cruel sentence wasn't meant to be overheard, but it set off a chain of events that would change lives, expose prejudice, and ignite hope. A betrayed woman, a silent child, a grieving father, and one forgotten language that brought them together. Grace Thompson had learned to move like a shadow. The mahogany dresser gleamed beneath her steady hands, the silver locket at her throat catching the afternoon light. She never let it swing too far. It was old and worn, and inside was the only photo she had of her grandmother, the woman who'd taught her how to speak without sound, how to fight without fists, how to love without words. In that room, 412, of the Grandeur Hotel, Grace was invisible just as expected. A cleaning lady in a crisp uniform, efficient and forgettable, until the phone rang. It wasn't hers. It belonged to Derek Hayes, the man who, until 3 minutes ago, she believed was the love of her life. A fashion executive with expensive suits and even more expensive lies. He had left in a rush that morning, forgetting his phone on the nightstand. Grace had hesitated when it buzzed, just long enough for the screen to light up and the call to connect automatically. His voice filled the room, sharp and careless, speaking to someone she didn't recognize. "Thank God you answered," said a woman on speaker. "I was worried you were still with that pathetic maid." Then came Derek's reply. "I'm in the lobby finishing paperwork. And no, I'm finally free of Grace. God, what was I thinking? She's just some African-American cleaning lady who talks with her hands like she's conducting an invisible orchestra. You're my real future, Sophia." Grace froze. The spray bottle in her hand slipped. Her breath caught in her throat. Her fingers began to move, not consciously, not deliberately, but out of instinct, out of pain. She signed the words her grandmother had once used to comfort her during the hardest nights. "I'm enough, little bird. I'm enough." But her hands were trembling too much to believe it. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. In the hallway, someone else had paused. Unseen, unnoticed, like so many silent witnesses before him. Charles Blackwell, the owner of the Grandeur Hotel, a man of wealth, power, and a daughter who had stopped speaking the day her mother died. He stood frozen by the open door, watching. Grace collapsed wordlessly beneath the weight of betrayal, watching her sign in a language he had long buried beneath guilt and regret. His sister Emma had once signed like that, before cancer took her voice, before their family failed to learn the language she needed most. Charles watched Grace now, not with pity but with recognition, with something aching and raw, something that said, "I've failed someone too." And that was the moment everything changed. He didn't speak, didn't reveal himself. Not yet, but a seed had been planted, one that would grow into a storm of reckoning, redemption, and quiet revolution for Grace, for Charles, for a little girl named Mia, who still waited for someone to speak her language. And it all began in room 412, with a forgotten phone, a silver locket, and the soundless prayer of a woman who thought no one was listening. Room 412 had grown cold. Not physically. If anything, the thermostat was a comfortable 72 degrees. But something had shifted. Grace felt it like a windless draft, like a pressure against her chest that made breathing too deliberate. She stared at Derek's phone, still glowing on the nightstand, still echoing in her head. She's just some African-American cleaning lady who talks with her hands like she's conducting an invisible orchestra. He said it like she was a joke, a footnote, an inconvenience he'd tolerated until something better came along. And for what? For following him across the country, for giving up her scholarship, her community, and almost her dignity. Her hands moved without her consent again. Not the careful, composed signs she used when helping guests or remembering her grandmother's bedtime blessings. No, these were frantic, broken movements. Her fingers tried to summon reassurance, but all they could say was, "I failed." I failed completely. She didn't know Charles Blackwell was watching. Charles had only meant to retrieve a contract left behind by his assistant. The corridor on the executive floor was usually silent, polished, and pristine. But the sound of Derek's voice had carried, shrill and mocking. That, combined with Grace's sudden gasp, had drawn him closer. He paused just outside the half-open door, unsure why he didn't announce himself. Maybe it was the rawness of the moment. Maybe it was the way Grace's body curled inward as though trying to disappear. And then, her hands. That was what stopped him cold. Charles hadn't seen American Sign Language in years. Not since Emma stopped trying. Not since her hands went still beneath hospital sheets, her voice long gone, her frustration buried beneath exhaustion. He watched now as Grace signed desperately into the air. The same fluid movements Emma once used to beg him to learn, to understand, to see her. His throat tightened. Something cracked open. Grace didn't know she was being watched. She just needed to move, to escape, to hold on to something solid. She gathered her cleaning supplies, her hands still shaking. She grabbed the bottle of glass cleaner too hard and nearly dropped it again. Derek's phone remained on the bed, its screen dark now, lifeless, just like the illusion of their future. As she exited through the service corridor, her eyes were glassy, unseeing. She passed two guests without registering their presence. Charles stood behind the partially closed door for several seconds after she disappeared, frozen, haunted, changed. Back in his office on the 20th floor, Charles couldn't shake. What he had seen, not Grace's tears, not the shaking hands, but the language. The same language he'd once promised Emma he'd learn. The same promise he'd broken because board meetings, investor pitches, and hotel acquisitions always took precedence. He'd told himself there would be time, that he'd learn once things settled, once he had fewer responsibilities, once Emma got better. But time never came, and Emma never got better. Now, standing alone with a city skyline stretching out in every direction, Charles felt the weight of a different kind of responsibility. This wasn't about missed chances anymore. This was about the chance right in front of him. Grace, he turned to his assistant, send me the staff files on accessibility training, and I want a report on our accommodations for deaf and hard of hearing guests. She blinked at the request, but nodded, making a note on her tablet. Charles didn't explain. How could he? How do you tell someone that a housekeeping staff member's grief had just reopened a wound you'd been ignoring for over a decade? He wasn't sure what he would do with the information yet. But he knew one thing for certain. He had failed Emma. He wasn't going to fail Grace. Later that night, Charles found himself reviewing security footage, not out of surveillance, but out of obligation. He watched Grace again, watched her hands, her desperation. The exact moment she realized her world had crumbled. 3 times. He replayed it 3 times. Each time he saw something new. The way she clutched her locket, the slight stumble as she left, the breath she forgot to take before picking up the pieces. He didn't sleep that night. He just stared out the window, wondering how many people like Grace move through his empire every day, silent, hurting, unseen, and what he could do about it. The lobby of the Grandeur Hotel was a study in movement. People checking in, rolling suitcases, concierge staff gliding behind counters. No one paid much attention to the small figure frozen near the base of the grand staircase. No one but Grace. She was polishing a brass fixture when she noticed the child. 6 years old, maybe 7, petite. Brown curls pulled back into neat pigtails, eyes wide with silent panic. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Her hands fluttered, too fast, too frightened. Grace set her rag down and approached slowly, keeping her body low, open, unthreatening. She recognized the look in the girl's eyes, the same wild fear she herself had worn more than once in her life. "Hey there, beautiful girl," she said softly, kneeling beside her. "Are you okay?" But it wasn't the words that mattered. It was her hands, fluid, gentle, confident. "Don't be afraid," she signed. "I'm here." The child's eyes lit up instantly, recognition blooming like a flower in spring. "I can't find my daddy," the girl signed back, her movements trembling. "Too many people, No one knows my language. Your daddy loves you very much. Grace signed, smiling warmly. I'm sure he's looking for you right now. Want me to help you find him? A tear slid down the girl's cheek. She nodded. Then, to Grace's surprise, the girl stepped forward and hugged her. A full-bodied, desperate, grateful hug. Grace hugged back, something unspoken passing between them. You understand me. The girl signed against her shoulder, just like Mommy used to. From the mezzanine level above the lobby, Charles Blackwell stopped in his tracks. He had been in the middle of a business call when he spotted the familiar curls of his daughter, his Mia, standing alone near the staircase. She must have slipped away from the nanny during the afternoon rush. His heart seized with panic, but then he saw her, Grace, on her knees, holding his daughter. Signing. Not just competent signing. Fluent. Mia was animated, engaged, more expressive than he'd seen in months. Charles descended the stairs slowly, cautiously, his phone still in hand but forgotten. Mia, he called out gently. There you are. I was worried sick. Mia turned to him, eyes wide but no longer afraid. She was just overwhelmed, sir, Grace said softly, standing but still holding Mia's hand. Too many strangers, too much noise. Charles's gaze drifted from Grace's name tag to her hands, which were still moving, calming, explaining. Signing even as she spoke. He hadn't even known Mia knew that many signs. You know ASL, he said, stunned. Grace nodded, instantly more reserved under his scrutiny. Yes, sir. My grandmother was deaf. She raised me. Mia tugged Charles's sleeve, her little hands dancing in excitement. She says you love me very much and you're learning my language because love needs practice. Charles's chest tightened. For a moment he couldn't speak. She remembered that. His own clumsy attempts at ASL had mostly ended in frustration. He'd felt like a failure, like he was losing his daughter one miscommunication at a time. But here was this woman, this quiet hotel employee, connecting with Mia like it was the most natural thing in the world. He turned to Grace, trying to find the right words. Thank you, he said. Then, awkwardly but earnestly, his hands moved. In ASL, thank you for Mia. Grace's eyes widened. She responded gently, both aloud and in sign. All children need to be heard. Not just listened to, heard. That was the moment Charles realized something he hadn't let himself admit. This woman, whose heartbreak he had witnessed silently days before, was the very person his family needed. Not because she could sign, but because she saw, really saw. Later that evening in his office, Charles watched the security footage one more time. Not of Grace's pain in room 412, but of her signing to Mia in the lobby. Her hands were like poetry. Her presence calming, powerful, and real. He made a note in his personal file. Grace Thompson, housekeeping, recommend private meeting. Discuss accessibility coordinator opportunity. Not out of charity, but out of respect. Some people walked through your life and vanished. Others signed a message into your soul that you never forgot. The service corridor smelled of bleach and resignation. The kind of place where sound didn't echo, because no one made any noise worth remembering. Grace had walked these halls 1,000 times, but this time her hands trembled, her steps unsure. The events of the past few days played in a cruel loop. Derek's voice in that hotel room. The unexpected kindness from Charles. The hug from Mia. The way her name had been spoken with something that almost resembled respect. She didn't know what to do with that. Grace had trained herself not to expect kindness, not to rely on it. Kindness was a temporary condition. It evaporated when someone realized you weren't worth the effort. And no one had reminded her of that better than Derek Hayes, which made it all the more jarring when she rounded the corner and nearly slammed into him. Derek stood there, leaning casually against the wall near the business center in a designer jacket, phone in one hand, smugness in the other. His eyes gleamed with recognition, sick, satisfied recognition. Well, he said, stepping forward and blocking her path. If it isn't the Grandeur Hotel's favorite little maid. Grace froze. What are you doing here? Meeting with events management. They're planning a fashion showcase and I just closed a deal. But imagine my surprise when I heard your name in the same sentence as the hotel owner." His voice dipped. "How very convenient, Grace. Sleeping your way up the ladder now." "Excuse me?" She tried to step around him, but he moved in tandem, blocking her again. "You always were a climber. I just didn't realize how far you'd sink to rise. Get out of my way." "You embarrassed me," Derek hissed, grabbing her wrist roughly. "My colleagues found out I dated a cleaning lady. You think that plays well in the fashion world?" Grace wrenched her arm away, his rings having left red indentations in her skin. "Let go of me." But he leaned in, his breath venom. "You lost everything because you're nothing." Something inside her snapped. "I lost everything because of you." Her voice cracked. "The fights, the stress. I was 12 weeks pregnant. Derek, you didn't even know. Or maybe you did and just didn't care." For a second he hesitated, then he scoffed. "You think that miscarriage was my fault? Please, you were weak. Couldn't even carry properly, that's on you." Her vision blurred. The ground shifted. She didn't remember walking away. Only that suddenly she was in a storage room. Door slammed shut, leaning against shelves full of rags and mop heads, trying to breathe and failing. Her hands moved involuntarily. "Grandma, I'm not strong enough. I can't do this anymore." The door opened. "Hey," said a quiet voice. "You okay?" Alex Rivera, maintenance, 35. Grease-stained shirt and the kind of eyes that knew what pain looked like. He didn't touch her. Didn't move too close. Just held out a clean handkerchief from his tool bag. "I heard what happened with that designer guy. Man's got poison running through his veins." Grace took the cloth but didn't speak. "HR wrote me up," she finally whispered. "They said I escalated the situation." Alex's jaw tightened. "That's bull, Hermana. He grabbed you. That's assault." "Doesn't matter." Her voice was hollow. "People like Derek win. People like me survive until we don't." She looked down, tears wetting her cheeks. "I lost a baby, Alex. Because of him. Because I was too scared to leave. Because he made me believe it was my fault. That everything was." Alex knelt beside her, voice low and steady. "That's not weakness. That's trauma, and you survived it, which makes you stronger than you know." She didn't reply, but her hands moved again, a sign she had repeated in the dark, alone, for months. "I'm not enough. I'll never be enough." What neither of them knew was that Charles Blackwell stood just outside the door. He'd come to find Grace. He'd heard from security about the hallway encounter. But when he reached the storage room, her voice stopped him cold. "I lost a baby." He couldn't move, could barely breathe. He stood still as stone, listening to her confession, watching her hands through the small gap in the door, signing. The words of self-hate he had once seen Emma sign in the dark. "I'm not enough." He didn't interrupt, but something in him turned to fire. Derek Hayes would never get near Grace again. And somehow, some way, he would help her believe that her hands, those trembling, powerful, eloquent hands, were meant to build, to heal, to soar. The executive suite on the 20th floor of the Grandeur Hotel was sleek, imposing, and designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, but today, Charles Blackwell wasn't looking out. He was pacing. A man used to making multi-million-dollar decisions without blinking was now struggling with a far more personal choice. How to show a woman like Grace Thompson that she mattered, not because she'd been broken, but because she hadn't let the breaking define her. The knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in." Grace stepped inside slowly, her uniform crisp, her posture tense, but her eyes were wary. She looked like someone expecting the worst, because that's what life had taught her to expect. "You asked to see me, Mr. Blackwell." He motioned to the seat across from his desk. "Please, Grace, sit." She did, perching on the edge like she was ready to run at any moment. "I heard what happened yesterday," Charles began, voice low. "With Derek, with HR." Grace looked away. "I'm not here to fire you," he added quickly. "Quite the opposite." She blinked, confused. Charles took a deep breath. "You were hurt, blamed, and silenced on my property in my hotel. That's on me. Grace opened her mouth, but he raised a hand gently. Let me finish. He came around the desk, not towering. Above her, but sitting in the chair beside her. Equal. Level. Human. When I was 17, my younger sister Emma was diagnosed with cancer. She lost her voice before she lost her hair. But she never lost her language, ASL, and we didn't learn it fast enough. She died feeling unseen. Because we didn't try hard enough. Because I didn't. Grace's eyes softened, her shoulders lowering slightly. You're not the only one haunted by what you didn't say in time, he whispered. Then, carefully, hesitantly, he signed, I'm sorry. I failed her. I don't want to fail again. Grace stared at his trembling hands, then slowly mirrored them back. Loss teaches us to listen with our hearts. Charles nodded. I'd like to offer you a position, a permanent one. As accessibility, coordinator for the Grandeur Hotel, and eventually for our entire chain. Grace's breath caught. I'm just a cleaner. No, he said firmly. You're the person who helped my daughter feel safe when I couldn't. The person who signs like poetry. The one who has lived the experience that no textbook can teach. She shook her head, overwhelmed. I'm not qualified. I don't have credentials. I don't even have a degree. You have something more valuable than paper. You have presence, empathy, lived wisdom. And you have something I can't buy or train. You see people. Grace's hands moved unconsciously. I'm afraid I'll disappoint you. Charles leaned forward, his voice full of fire. Derek spent 3 years trying to convince you that you're less than, but I've seen the opposite. I've seen you build bridges with your bare hands. He reached out tentatively and signed the words she'd once signed in pain. You are enough. A tear slipped down her cheek. I'll try, she whispered. I'll try. Charles smiled, relieved, humbled. That's all I'm asking. Then, after a pause, there's a conference next month. National Accessibility Leadership. I'd like you to help us prepare. Maybe even speak. Grace looked like he'd suggested she fly to the moon. I'm not ready. He smiled. Neither was I when I became a father. But love doesn't wait until we're ready. It just asks that we show up. And that day, in an office built for power and profit, 2 people made a silent pact. To show up. To speak in the language of courage. To change what it meant to be seen. 3 weeks into her new position, Grace was beginning to breathe again. Her mornings were no longer spent scrubbing marble or changing sheets, but standing at the front of staff training sessions, teaching basic ASL, sharing accessibility practices, and watching as colleagues slowly began to see the world differently. Her afternoons were spent with Mia, homework help, snack time, and quiet conversations in sign language that had transformed the child from withdrawn to radiant. And Charles? He hovered at the edge of it all, not intruding but present, always learning, always watching her with a mix of admiration and something deeper he hadn't yet named. But even in this new season of possibility, Grace couldn't shake the voice that had followed her for years. It whispered in the quiet moments. It echoed through her email inbox. It sounded exactly like Derek. The first anonymous message came late one evening. Word is spreading about your new position. Some staff think it's unfair a maid got promoted over professionals. Just thought. You should know. A concerned colleague. Grace stared at the screen, heart sinking. Then another. The staff are laughing behind your back, pretending to learn your signs but calling you the janitor professor when you leave the room. You'll never belong here. And another. Derek was right. You're still the girl who talks to herself with her hands, just with fancier clothes. Now. She stopped opening them after that, but the damage was done. She began second-guessing every smile from coworkers, every compliment from Charles, every time Mia hugged her and said, "You're like Mommy used to be." Was it real? Or was she once again living in a bubble someone else was about to pop? The breaking point came unexpectedly. She walked into Charles's office one afternoon to drop off accessibility guidelines and heard him on the phone. "Yes, we have an excellent ASL interpreter on staff," he said confidently. "Grace Thompson. She's been leading our training and will be our main stage interpreter at the conference. Grace stopped cold. Interpreter? She'd never told him she was certified. Because she wasn't. She was fluent, yes, raised in it, lived it, breathed it, but she didn't have the formal credentials required by national interpreting standards. Suddenly, the floor felt unstable. If she stood on that stage next month, claiming to represent not just the hotel, but the deaf community, and someone exposed her lack of formal training, it wouldn't just be her reputation at stake. It would be Charles's. It would be Mia's trust. It would be everything. That night, Grace sat on her bed, laptop open to the National Interpreter Certification. Board's website. Every page reminded her what she didn't have. Courses, exams, ethics training, vocabulary specialization. And none of them could measure the kind of fluency taught by rocking a deaf grandmother to sleep during chemotherapy or comforting a grieving child in a crowded lobby. Her hands moved unconsciously. I'm not enough. I'm not enough. I'm not enough. The next morning, she walked into Charles's office with quiet determination. Mia was there, coloring at a small desk. She looked up and smiled, signing, "Hi, Mama Grace," with innocent joy. Grace's heart broke a little. "Charles," she said, "I need to talk to you about the conference." He looked up from his paperwork, smiling. "Of course. Is it about the schedule?" "No." Her voice trembled. "It's about the role you've asked me to play." He sat up straighter, concerned. "I'm not a certified interpreter," she said. "I never claimed I was. I learned ASL from my grandmother. I've used it my whole life, but I'm not formally trained. I don't meet the standards required for this kind of representation." He was silent for a moment, not angry, but hurt. "Why? Didn't you tell me this earlier?" "Because I was scared," she admitted. "Scared you'd realize I'm not who you think I am, that I don't belong here." Charles walked around the desk and sat beside her. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." She nodded, bracing herself. "Are you sabotaging yourself?" he asked gently. "Because someone convinced you that success isn't meant for people like you?" She blinked, stunned. I don't know." He leaned in, voice soft but unshakable. "I've watched you transform this hotel. I've watched you heal my daughter. I've watched you teach a room full of adults to listen with their eyes. Grace, credentials are important, yes, but they're not the only measure of value." She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and showed him the emails. He read them in silence, each line tightening his jaw, darkening his expression. "They sound just like him," she whispered. "But even if they're not from Derek's, they're still him somehow." "No," Charles said, his voice low but full of steel. "They're the part of him that you kept alive, the voice he planted in your head." Grace's eyes welled with tears. "But what if I fail? What if I embarrass you?" Charles took her hands, firm, steady, grounding. "You already are what you're afraid of pretending to be. You're already the person we need. Mia and I, we believe in you." Just then, Mia ran over and tapped Grace's shoulder. With perfect clarity, she signed, "You make words beautiful. Like Mommy did. You don't need papers to prove magic is real." Grace sobbed. And in that moment, she realized the only person left to believe in her was herself. The morning of the conference broke clear and bright over the city skyline. The Grandeur Hotel's ballroom buzzed with anticipation. Accessibility professionals, disability advocates, educators, and policymakers mingled over coffee and bagels, many already signing animatedly. Grace stood behind a curtained stage area, nerves twisting in her stomach like live wires. She wore a deep navy dress with subtle gold accents, chosen by Mia the night before. On her wrist was her grandmother's old silver bracelet, slightly tarnished but warm with memory. Her hands were steady, her heart was not. But she was here, not because she had the most qualifications, but because she had something else. She had survived. Dr. Elena Vasquez, keynote speaker and legend in the deaf community, approached her just before the event began. Her eyes were kind, her presence electric. "You ready, Grace?" she signed. "I am," Grace replied, voice soft but sure. Elena smiled. You remind me of a younger me, but more dangerous, because you're not here to impress anyone. You're here to change them, Grace swallowed hard. Let's change them then. The ballroom filled quickly. Visual applause rippled as Elena took the stage. Grace stood just beside her, positioned perfectly for everyone to see her hands. Elena began, her voice confident and clear. But it was Grace's signing, fluid, expressive, precise, that captivated the room. She wasn't just interpreting. She was translating emotion, story, truth. Halfway through the keynote, Grace saw a movement in the back of the ballroom. Her breath caught. Derek. He stood near the registration desk, dressed impeccably, holding a sleek black vendor badge. He wasn't supposed to be here. Security had banned him from the property, but he had found a loophole. A new company name, a new registration, a borrowed smile. And now he walked straight toward the crowd, eyes locked on Grace. When he reached the stage's edge, he didn't shout. He smirked. Then he raised his voice. That woman, he called out, pointing to Grace, is a fraud. Gasps rippled through the room. Elena stopped mid-sentence. Grace froze. She's not a certified interpreter, Derek continued. She's just a cleaning lady who learned to wave her hands around. I should know. I dated her for 3 years. Some attendees looked confused. Others appalled. Grace stepped forward, her heart pounding. She doesn't deserve to be on that stage. Derek spat. She gave up her scholarship, failed out of college, and couldn't even hold on to a man who was settling for her. She's a dropout pretending to be a professional. Silence fell. Then, a small voice cut through the crowd. Mia. She had slipped away from her assigned seat and now stood beside the stage, chin high, tiny hands already moving. Grace is the bravest person I know, she signed. She saved me when I was lost, and she saved my daddy's heart. Charles appeared behind her, his expression thunderous. My daughter says Grace taught her that love doesn't need sound, he said, translating. That real family is about who sees you, not who shares your DNA. Visual applause erupted. Deaf attendees raised their hands in support. Hearing guests clapped aloud. But Derek wasn't done. Ask her about the baby she lost, he shouted. Ask her why she really left school. Ask her what kind of woman lets a miscarriage define her. Grace flinched as if struck. Elena stepped forward then, voice calm but lethal. Young man, she said, I don't know you, but I know her. She is not on this stage because of a title. She is here because of truth. Because she speaks for those of us who have been dismissed, silenced, minimized. She turned to Grace. My dear, may I still have the honor of your voice? Grace looked out over the crowd, dozens of faces, some curious, some compassionate, and one, Mia, watching her with the kind of faith that children give only to the few they truly believe in. Grace signed, Love heals, love listens, love lifts. She knelt beside Mia, gathered the girl in her arms, and signed with tears streaming down her face. Love chooses connection over fear. Charles stepped beside them. Security had arrived and was already escorting Derek out, his vendor badge torn off, his protests ignored. But Grace no longer saw him. He was background noise. She looked at the girl in her arms, at the man beside her, at the community who had chosen to see her, and then she rose, with grace, with fire, with hands that had once been trembling, but now told stories no one could ignore. The ballroom, still, echoing with applause, shifted into a stillness that felt sacred. Grace stood on the main stage, holding Mia's hand, Dr. Vasquez to her right, Charles just behind. The light overhead cast no shadows, only a quiet clarity. Grace didn't need to be introduced again. She was the moment, her hands lifted slowly. Today we talk about what it means to be heard. The interpreter for hearing attendees translated, aloud, but most eyes were already fixed on Grace, her hands, her posture, her presence. Not everyone who uses their voice is truly heard, and not everyone who is silent is ignored. Sometimes the loudest courage comes in the form of a whisper or a sign. She paused, then signed slowly. I once thought I had to be perfect to be seen, that I had to earn love with obedience, that if I didn't speak loudly enough, I would disappear. Mia watched, enraptured. Charles stood, silent, proud. But the truth is, I was never invisible. I was just surrounded by people who never bothered to learn my language. Visual applause. Deaf guests shook their hands in the air. Hearing attendees stood. Some wiped away tears. Dr. Vasquez took the mic once more, her tone celebratory. We live in a world that prizes fluency, but forgets empathy. Grace Thompson didn't just interpret for me today. She interpreted for all of us who've been silenced by systems, status, or shame. She turned to Grace. Thank you for reminding us that access isn't charity. It's a human right. That afternoon, headlines flooded Twitter and news outlets. From Maid to movement, Grace Thompson redefines accessibility. A housekeeper's hands open doors to a new era of inclusion. Little girl signs mama. On stage, audience in tears. But Grace was unaware of any of it. She was in the hotel's quiet rooftop garden watching Mia chase butterflies with Lena and Alex. Her shoes were off. Her eyes were closed. For the first time in years, she felt grounded and lifted at once. Charles approached, 2 paper cups of tea in hand. He sat beside her on the bench, silence comfortable between them. You did it, he said. We did, she replied. You changed how people see us, how they see this hotel, this industry. You did something I couldn't with 100 policies. She looked at him, unsure. I didn't do it alone. No, he said. You did it by refusing to stay small. A beat passed. Grace. His voice was softer now. What Mia signed today, calling you mama, that wasn't coached. It wasn't performative. Grace blinked, emotion catching in her throat. I know, she whispered. She's been asking me at bedtime when it would be okay to call you that out loud. Grace looked down at her hands. Is it? He placed his hand over hers. It already is. Later that night, in the privacy of their now shared living space, Mia lay curled in Grace's arms as Charles read aloud from a children's book. But it was the signs that mattered. They spoke more with their hands than the book's words ever could. You are safe, Grace signed to Mia. You are seen, Charles added. Mia reached for both of them, forming a clumsy but perfect sentence. You are my family. The next day, Grace opened her laptop and found hundreds of emails from attendees, community leaders, and news outlets. But one subject line stood out. From Dean Wallace, Community College of Language Access. Grace, we'd like to discuss building a new ASL interpreter certification program, led by you. Full autonomy, full respect, full circle leadership. She stared at it for a long time, then smiled. 18 months later, the air inside the auditorium buzzed with electric pride. The banner overhead read, First Graduating Class, National Community Centered. ASL Interpreter Program founded and directed by Grace Thompson. Grace stood backstage in a tailored blazer the color of midnight, her silver locket glinting under the lights. She adjusted the microphone, then, without thinking, traced her fingers along the bracelet on her wrist. Her grandmother's. Still warm, as if passed from one heartbeat to another. Out in the crowd, Charles held Mia on his lap. The 7-year-old was busy signing animatedly to her friends. Her hair was longer now, her confidence taller, her eyes still full of fire. Beside them sat Lena, Alex, Dr. Vasquez, and more than a dozen former students Grace had trained herself, each now ready to bridge worlds just like she had. Grace stepped to the podium. Today you become more than interpreters, she signed, speaking with quiet strength. You become bridge builders, advocates, listeners of the highest order. You've learned a language, but more than that, you've learned how to see people. Her voice caught for a moment. The most powerful signs you'll ever use aren't technical. They're emotional, compassion, presence, patience. She scanned the crowd and found Charles's gaze, steady, proud, unwavering. The world doesn't just need interpreters. It needs people who believe that no one deserves to be left unheard. After the ceremony, as the final applause echoed, and the students threw their caps into the air, Mia ran to her mother with a handmade card. It was covered in rainbow-colored hands, forming the ASL sign for love. Inside, it read, "To the best teacher and mama in the world. Thank you for teaching me that love has its own language." Grace knelt to hug her tightly. "I love you too, sweetheart. Always." That evening, as the family walked hand in hand toward their car, Charles squeezed Grace's fingers. "You ready to go home?" he asked. "I am home," she replied, her signs steady and full of peace. They passed by a downtown cafe where a familiar face sat alone by the window, Derek. He didn't see them. He was staring at his phone, expression blank, scrolling through. A world that had moved on without him. Grace didn't feel anger, only relief. She had walked through fire and come out whole. Later that night, Grace and Charles tucked Mia into bed. The little girl signed sleepily. "Tell me the story again, the one where broken hearts find each other and become whole." Charles began, his ASL now smooth and confident. "Once upon a time, there was a little bird who thought her wings were too damaged to fly." Mia smiled, eyes closing. And from the doorway, Grace whispered, with her voice and her hands, "We are enough, exactly as we are. Some people are born to shine. Others must walk through silence, pain, and invisibility before the world finally sees them." Grace Thompson was one of the latter. Once dismissed as just a maid, she became the voice for those who couldn't speak. Through the quiet power of sign language, Grace didn't just interpret words, she interpreted worth. Her story reminds us that you don't need perfection to be seen. You just need courage. The courage to speak up after betrayal. The courage to step onto a stage without credentials. Only truth. The courage to choose love when hatred would be easier. This message isn't only for the deaf, the poor, or the dismissed. It's for anyone who's ever wondered, am I enough? The answer is yes. You are enough. You are needed. And your story matters. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever doubted your worth, if someone ever made you feel invisible, comment below. I deserve to be heard. And if you believe that language isn't just about sound but about connection, then like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe now so you don't miss tomorrow's powerful story. Tomorrow's video? A missing daughter, a broken father, and a shocking revelation. She'd been living next door for 2 years. You won't want to miss it.